Get ready for Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes, the 30-minute show packed with an hour's worth of information, bringing you familiar guests on important issues such as immigration, education, the Middle East, culture, religion, and the changing worldviews of Americans and the world. You've seen her on Fox News, you've read her on the World Wide Web. Now here's Sharon.
For such a time as this.
Freeing the minds of the brainwashed masses.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of Changing Worldviews. Today, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said yesterday that President Obama is the least partisan president that she has worked with during her extensive time in Washington, D.C., and says that the problem lies with the GOP. California Democrat said this at her weekly press briefing. The Internal Revenue Service, already facing accusations that its workers improperly snooped through tax files, has hired a former police officer convicted just a few years ago of illegally accessing FBI records and providing information to a subject of counterterrorism investigation involving an infamous al-Qaeda figure. At the IRS, Mr. Rasool serves as a financial management analyst 3 rungs away from the highest level career position. He was hired by the IRS after he served his probationary period. The United States is, quote, disappointed by Israeli impenitence for weakness remark 4 days after Israel's defense minister publicly accused the U.S. of showing weakness around the world. The Obama administration is still waiting for an apology. Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon said in a speech at Tel Aviv University on Monday that the U.S. is demonstrating weakness around the world and warned the U.S. if you sit and wait at home, terrorism will come again. And Iran's spiritual leader Khomeini says he is uncertain if the Holocaust ever happened. He also describes the Middle East peace talks as, quote, a plot to cleanse Palestine and urged Iranians to join hands to overcome sanctions the day after Israeli and U.S. leaders sent conciliatory messages to Tehran on their New Year's holiday. Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei marked the event by questioning the Holocaust and vowing to overcome U.S.-led sanctions. And that's what we're going to be talking about today in part 2 as we look at wars and rumors of wars with my guest, Sandra Teplinsky, author of Why Still Care About Israel, direct from Jerusalem. We're going to take another look at the unrest in the Middle East as we look at the broader picture of wars and rumors of wars taking place in our day. So stay with me. It's powerful.
You're listening to Sharon Hughes, coming to you from the Wild, Wild West, and we mean wild.
Well, thanks for staying with us, ladies and gentlemen. Just some of the headlines that I was looking at when I interviewed Sandra Teplinsky earlier were the following. Iran continues its buildup towards Armageddon. This is from The Guardian, where it reported that Iran and its nuclear weapons have been a matter of concern to the world for years now, and the ambition to talk Iran into an agreement opened again with the European Union. Another one, Israeli news admits the Temple Mount may be key to the peace deal or apocalypse. Jerusalem's holiest site, once again, is triggering crisis between Muslims and Jews and between regional states, which, as we've talked about on the show before and will address today as well, the role that Jerusalem plays in a, quote, successful peace deal. Sandra Teplinsky, author of Why Still Care About Israel. I spoke earlier with her from Jerusalem, and here's that interview.
My guest today is going to take us to the next level of an issue that you know, as a regular listener, how much we are concerned about the decrease of support for Israel, particularly as the conflict in Gaza is increasing and the current administration here in America is pressuring Israel to go against the covenant that they have, that all the land belongs to them. They hardly have all the land. They are being pressured to even divide Jerusalem. author Sandra Teplinsky unlocks the mystery of Israel amid the rising international tension as the Jewish-Muslim relationship grows increasingly tense, and as our current administration, our Secretary of State John Kerry, is working feverishly for a peace plan, but he hasn't been able to do that. Also, the spotlight of world events is focusing more and more intently on Israel, and Christian believers are in a quandary of what to think because there are divided sides on this, and more people in the church are wondering, why do we have to stand with Israel? Why don't we stand with the Palestinians? And so I've asked Sandra to come on to talk about her book, Why Still Care About Israel. Sandra, thank you for being with us on Changing Worldviews. So good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Sharon. It's a blessing to be here with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you a little bit more about Sandra, and then we're going to get into some hot topics. She's the president and founder of Light of Zion, a messianic outreach to Israel and the church. It's based in California and Jerusalem, and she has been in Messianic Jewish ministry since 1979. From an Orthodox Jewish background herself, she obtained a JD from Indiana University School of Law, a BA in Political Science from the University of Illinois, and Bible training from Talbot Seminary in Los Angeles. She's a former attorney. She's authored several books, including The Blessing of Israel and Out of the Darkness, The Untold Story of Jewish Revival in the Former Soviet Union, and the book we're going to talk about today. So Jack Hayford, Sandra, said about your book, it's an essential handbook of immeasurable worth for every thoughtful believer. Its message could not be more needed than in this present hour of global conflict, both political and spiritual. So why did you decide you needed to write this book?
Well, Sharon, as you know, things in the Middle East change even as we speak, and I had originally written Why Care About Israel 10 years ago, when at that time Israel simply was not on the radar of non-Jews in the United States. The church, for the most part, was unaware and focused on other issues. In the intervening 10 years, matters are dramatically different. What we're experiencing in the church and in the secular world is an increasing divergence of opinion surrounding Israel and the Middle East. There are those that are increasingly leftist, those that are increasingly rightist or conservative, and it seems that the conflict is solidifying. And so my goal in writing this book was not only to try to bring a more moderate Messianic Jewish or Jewish Christian perspective in which being pro-Israel would not mean being anti-Palestinian. The heart of God is for both peoples. The heart of God is for justice and prophetic fulfillment for both peoples. But to converge these different dimensions of God's heart and truths that are reflected in His Word so that we can connect the dots and get some practical wisdom on how to navigate these issues and even in a practical way, order our own lives here in the United States, because what takes place in the Middle East does affect us. For those who are not Bible believers, who don't identify with a Judeo-Christian tradition, there are still compelling moral and practical, expedient, common sense reasons to care about Israel. And so Why Care About Israel has been updated now in a dramatically revised edition entitled Why Still Care About Israel.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of those compelling reasons, is that they're our ally. They're the only democracy. They're completely surrounded by Arab nations, and they're our friend. And as a nation, we should be standing by our friends. And, of course, we care about the Palestinian people, but we don't want to lose sight of the fact that their Arab brothers and sisters are not taking care of them.
Absolutely. There's been a lot of injustice that's unfolded over this justice issue, and as I describe in my book, very sadly, the overwhelming majority of what we would call genuine injustice that has been suffered by the Palestinians has been suffered at the hands of their own leadership. There is, however, this very sad blame game that's historically rooted in the conflict, in which Israel takes the blame. Israel, has an address. Israel has leaders that are stable and solid and can be located, and so kind of there's a place to pin the blame, so to speak. Now, I'm not saying that Israel's blameless, but Israel has demonstrated over and over through the decades an outstanding record of attempts to comply with democratic principles and human rights principles, and has in fact complied with those principles the overwhelming majority of times. In fact, as legal scholar Alan Dershowitz has pointed out, no nation in the history of humankind in a comparable situation that's enduring ongoing conflict has ever done as well as Israel in safeguarding the human rights of all of those involved in the conflict. And these aren't just blanket statements that I'm making. I realize that there are some that would take up issue with them. I've researched hundreds of hours these particular issues, and in my book there are references to endnotes and source documents so that individuals who are seriously interested in these issues can consider the matter from a Messianic Jewish pro-Israel perspective that is not anti-Palestinian in the sense of cursing Palestinians or denouncing them, nor denying that they ought to have a good life. The conflict, as we talk, just in recent days, Benjamin Netanyahu has reiterated that there will be an end to this conflict when the Palestinians are willing to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. That has never historically been the case. The Palestinians have not been willing to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, and that has not been the pan-Arab position. We can go through poll after poll taken of the Israeli public and see that the overwhelming majority of Israelis would be glad to make peace and even relinquish land if it would result in the saving of lives and put an end to the conflict. But it's a non-issue because we never get to that point in negotiations because, very sadly, the Palestinians, poll after poll, as well as demonstrated deed after demonstrated deed, indicate that they are not willing to accept Israel as a Jewish state. And so the issue, as we're seeing unfold in recent days once again, is a non-issue. We're not getting to the issue of two states living side by side because one purported state will not recognize the right of the other state to exist. And that's rooted fundamentally in radical Islamism. It's a theological issue, and the theology, as you probably know, Sharon, is not only a doctrine of spirituality that we would think of in the West, but it's a doctrine that endorses dishonesty and lying, sub-doctrine called taqiyya in Islam, endorses lying and dishonesty in order to achieve higher Islamic goals. And so it's very difficult to sort through these issues without taking taqiyya with a huge block of salt. Unfortunately, we don't always see truth propagated by those who are Israel's detractors.
We have to take a break here. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes, the late afternoon commute show that knows the importance of bringing concise commentary on the day's news.
Bibles that were later burned by the U.S. government. These holy books were confiscated about a year ago at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. An independent film aired by the Al Jazeera network had shown evangelical soldiers worshiping at Bagram and talking about ways to share their faith.
One of my proudest moments was when we were able to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was not an easy process. There were some who doubted whether we'd ever get it done. This is done.
No sitting president has ever done what Barack Obama did yesterday.
And it's not just a matter of head, it's a matter of heart. It's who I am. It's what I care about.
It's time to wake up, America. Radical agendas that are finding ways to mainstream themselves into public policy, including here in the United States. It's time to pay attention and read between the words of the speeches of our leaders, from our president all the way down, and take off the rose-colored glasses and look at things as they really are.
If you'd like to change the world, won't you partner with us? For a donation of $15 a month, you'll receive our monthly Best of the Best program on CD and Sharon's monthly Saying It Like It Is letter. Just go to changingworldviews.com/donation page and sign up online. Or send your first $15 donation to Changing World Views, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California 94975-0624.
Thanks for staying with me. I spoke with Sandra Teplinsky, author of Why Still Care About Israel.
And Sandra, I mentioned about the Iranian general who has now come out. He's the Air Force commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, and he was quoted by Iran's Far News agency saying on Tuesday that Iran's military has its finger on the trigger to destroy Israel as soon as it receives the orders to do so. And let me give another quote here. Iranian leaders regularly issue threats against Israel and the United States, but the wording ascribed to Salami here on Tuesday was particularly aggressive. He said, Islam has given us this wish, capacity, and power to destroy the Zionist regime. And the comments came a day after Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who presented a shipment of what he said were Iranian arms intercepted at sea last week, which he charged were intended for terror groups in Gaza. So this was the response from Iran. What are your thoughts and comments on this whole issue of what specifically the Iranian threat is, which who can forget Benjamin Netanyahu at the UN a year ago with that big picture of the bomb and saying, here's where the red line is?
Well, Sharon, as an Israeli, on the one side, I'm not surprised. We have been hearing threats like this for years now. In fact, that's precisely why our Prime Minister stood in front of the UN with what many mocked as a cartoon, but it was effective in terms of the picture being worth 1,000 words, and to its viewers, stood in front of the UN with that picture of a bomb and a red line because Iran is not hiding its intentions. I think the world doesn't want to particularly get involved because the world has enough problems that it's dealing with. I think that Americans are either, for the most part, distracted or divided. Of course, we have an administration that's taking us in a dramatically different direction. We've got the European Union that's got its own problems and is attempting to appease Islam. And so what we have is a potential scenario in which we could possibly, before long, unless God intervenes, face some of these dramatic, possibly end times warfare battles that are described in the scriptures. Now, will God intervene? We don't. Well, God is in charge. It's interesting that as we talk, we're in the season of the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is based on the book of Esther, in which one Jewish woman who interceded before the king, was used by God to change Jewish history and to prevent the eradication of the Jewish people. It's not coincidental in my mind that the saber-rattling from Iran, and it's not just saber-rattling, we know that Iran is preparing nuclear weapons in large part to first destroy Israel, to first go after what they call the Saturday people, but then the Sunday people. It's not just Israel that Iran has its finger on, but also the Western world, Europe and the United States. And so if we think this is just an Israel problem or a Jewish problem, we're sorely mistaken. We are sadly deceiving ourselves. And I think that's why Benjamin Netanyahu, again, presented such a black and white picture of what's really taking place here. So
yes.
It seems that we're coming down to the wire. God, I believe, with all my heart, is calling his people to approach him as king, as Esther approached the king, for such a time as this, and to ask that he would intervene, because I believe that whether or not this is the final countdown to the end of days, it's all to be in God's sovereign timing. Many times the enemy tries to, and Israel's detractors, and for those who believe in the Scriptures, Satan, the enemy, try to expedite things. But God is in control. We in Israel live with that as our anchor and our peace, and we continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, knowing that that peace is first of all spiritual through the Prince of Peace, God's Son, Jesus Christ.
We have to take a break here. Stay with us. We'll be right back. This month at Changing Worldviews is Remember History Month. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. While there are various versions of that quote, nonetheless, its sentiment rings true to all lovers of truth. Remembering history, in other words, learning from it, is a key to not repeating it. And all month long, we are going to be pointing to and pointing out history, real history, not the rewritten versions. And to go along with that, our special offer this month, yours for a donation of $25 or more, is a 4-part CD series with 10-time Pulitzer Prize nominee Edwin Black on the War on the Weak and IBM and the Holocaust. It's all about Hitler, Israel, and the United States, a very important part of history that we may think we know, but have we learned everything from that part of history we need to? And are we passing on real history to our kids and our grandkids?
Well, in fact, Hitler wrote fan mail to the associates of Margaret Sanger of Planned Parenthood, who also was a eugenicist and who wished to eliminate the existence of 2/3 of humanity through her methods. I can tell you that Mia Jamad is attempting to do in 12 minutes what Hitler could not do in 12 years. Virtually all forms of genocide in the last 200 years that I have studied have emanated and been cultivated at the university level.
I'd love to send you this 4-part CD series, War on the Weak and IBM and the Holocaust with Edwin Black, for a donation of $25 or more. Send your check to Changing Worldviews, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California 94975-0624. Or you can go to changingworldviews.com, click on the donate button, and the one-time donation for monthly special, changingworldviews.com. Dwayne will give the address again. Thanks for staying with me. Sandra Teplinsky, author of Why Still Care About Israel.
One of the issues that I really want us in our time together to look at and to get your take on is the whole countering Christian Zionism with Christian Palestinianism. I opened the show talking about how more and more, even here in America, especially here in America, we're seeing a lot of the church that has predominantly stood with Israel in the past, in this postmodern, emergent church kind of generation, is really questioning doing that, and a lot on the religious political left are pulling for Palestine. So now we have this division in the church that almost mirrors, without the violence, the division that's happening there between Israel and the Palestinians. How do you want to comment on all that?
Well, that's an extremely important issue, and I'm glad that we're going to be able to address it, Sharon. As important as it is, it's also sad. Historically, there has been an erroneous teaching in the church called replacement theology, and it has, as its name implies, wrongly taught that the church has replaced Israel in God's heart and prophetic plans. That the church has replaced Israel covenantally, and that, as my book goes into in detail, is not only incorrect, but almost all churches today that identify as Christian, even those that are primarily Arab, agree that replacement theology is wrong and mistaken. However, what has emerged in the aftermath of most churches denouncing replacement theology is a new replacement theology called fulfillment theology. Some call it Christian Palestinianism because it was birthed specifically as a counter movement to denigrate and even destroy Christian Zionism or Christian support of Israel. Others call it Palestinian fulfillment theology, and it very simply teaches that all of God's promises and covenants, which, by the way, are unconditional, meaning that they cannot be abrogated because God is the one who ensures that they will come to pass. So all of those promises have already been completely fulfilled in the person of Jesus. Now, the practical effect of fulfillment theology, to kind of get to the bottom line here, is the same as the practical effect of replacement theology. It is simply that instead of the church superseding Israel, this time it is now Jesus himself that has superseded Israel. And so when the scriptures speak of God's restoration of Israel in the last days, or God's covenant with Israel still standing even after Jesus or Yeshua's crucifixion and resurrection in Romans chapter 9, for example, that is misinterpreted using an extremely faulty approach toward understanding the scriptures, a faulty hermeneutic that is misinterpreted by some to mean that those promises have been completely fulfilled in the life and times of Jesus the Messiah. They no longer apply to Israel. As I said, in order to do that, you have to use an approach of interpreting the scriptures that goes against the grain of Scripture itself. The traditional way of interpreting the Bible is based on how the Bible interprets itself. If we continue to interpret the Bible based on how the Bible interprets itself, we will not be led astray by these types of winds of doctrine, and I go into that in my book. Now, with Christian Palestinianism, based on that faulty hermeneutic, there has been an alliance that's been forged between Christians, mostly in the Bethlehem area, some in East Jerusalem, but those who identify as evangelical Christians, with Islam, with scholars, theological scholars from the West, that has given rise to this movement now called Christian Palestinianism that has spread globally throughout the church to teach that there is no, bottom line, this is the teaching, there is no biblical justification for Israel to exist today, certainly not to exist as a Jewish state.
Wow.
Again, I go into that not only addressing it head-on in the book, but the entire book addresses it indirectly, if not directly, showing not just biblically, but also from the vantage point of being an attorney, with that kind of reasoning as well as, solid theology, why that is absolutely not the case, why God's unconditional covenant with Israel still stands, and how, if it didn't, his covenant with the church, with those who find relationship with God through the sacrifice, the atoning sacrifice of Jesus as Messiah and his resurrection, how as a result of that, our covenant with him still stands.
That's for sure. And, as you were talking, I just want to remind our listeners that Jesus himself said that not a dot or a tittle would be removed from the law. In other words, the entire Bible still stands today. And unfortunately, this isn't the only issue where there is interpretation being brought. There are those that believe, as I know you're aware, Sandra, that Jesus already has returned. The second coming already happened because he has come in his people, Christians. He lives inside of Christians, so the second coming has already happened. So there's a lot, which I believe, as we are edging ever closer to the end times events that you alluded to in the first part of the show, we're seeing more and more, I want to say, heresy happening in the church, misinterpreting the scriptures by people that either are ignorant of and are teaching it or purposely doing it.
Well, we will have part 2 in the meantime. Until I see you tomorrow, this is Sharon Hughes saying it like it is.
Thanks for listening to Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes. You can get more information on today's topic or order a CD of today's show by visiting changingworldviews.com or writing us at Changing Worldviews, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California, 94975-0624. You can also contact us at talk@changingworldviews.com. That's talk@changingworldviews.com. Our program is listener-supported, and we appreciate your tax-deductible donations to help us get the truth out on the important issues Sharon addresses on the show. So until next time, remember, stay alert, stay informed. We live in a changing world.